A woman rested quietly on the plane, her body finally giving in to the rare gift of sleep, when a trembling announcement shattered the calm. "Is there a fighter pilot on board?" The voice cracked over the intercom, filled with fear as the massive Boeing 747 shook under the fury of one of the strongest storms ever recorded across the North Atlantic. Co-pilot James Wilson's voice echoed through the cabin, each word heavy with dread. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Mitchell is unconscious. We have a medical emergency and I need urgent assistance. If anyone here has military aviation experience, please identify yourself now." In row 23C, Kesha Washington stirred. At 34, she had mastered the art of sleeping anywhere, a skill she picked up during her years serving on missions where rest was always a luxury. But the desperation in that young pilot's voice jolted her awake, pulling her upright in her seat. Around her, the aircraft rocked violently, rain lashing against the windows like 1,000 fists. Fear was spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Children wailed, grown men whispered frantic prayers, and some passengers typed out goodbye messages on their phones, convinced this would be their last chance to speak to loved ones. In first class, Richard Blackwood, a wealthy businessman, shifted his designer glasses and sneered. "As if anyone in coach would qualify," he muttered, his eyes sweeping over the passengers with disdain. His gaze lingered on Kesha, dressed in plain jeans and a simple blouse, her natural curls pulled into a no-fuss ponytail. To him, she was nothing more than another ordinary traveler, a black woman, alone, probably returning from a modest job or a family visit. Certainly not the type he imagined capable of saving anyone. The turbulence worsened, shaking the plane so hard that trays fell and luggage shifted above their heads. Panic bubbled into chaos and James's voice cracked again through the speakers. "Please, anyone with combat aviation training, we are blind in a Category 5 storm, and I can't handle this alone." Kesha scanned the sea of terrified faces around her. She could feel their silent verdict. None of them even considered her a possibility. She was invisible, underestimated the way she had always been. Just as she rose slowly from her seat, Richard jumped up with theatrical confidence. "Listen up," he shouted toward the cockpit. "My brother-in-law is a pilot. I've flown private jets dozens of times. I can handle this." A flight attendant rushed forward, her voice urgent but firm. "Sir, we need someone with actual military experience. This is not the same as civilian flying." Richard puffed out his chest, arrogance dripping from every word. "Are you questioning me? I paid $15,000 for these first-class seats. I'm the most qualified person here." It was then that Kesha stepped into the aisle. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps controlled and precise, nothing like the frantic energy swirling around her. As she approached the cockpit, heads turned. Some passengers stared with curiosity, others with skepticism. Her calm voice cut through the noise. "Colonel Kesha Washington, United States Air Force. Over 500 hours logged in F-22 Raptors. I'm trained in extreme navigation and combat aviation under severe conditions." Silence gripped the cabin. Richard's mouth fell open in disbelief, his face twisting in mockery. "You've got to be kidding," he scoffed. But there was something in Kesha's eyes that silenced anyone who doubted her. A steadiness forged from surviving storms far worse than this. It wasn't just confidence. It was the unshakable calm of someone who had been tested in war and brought her people home. If you're drawn to stories of courage and redemption, the narrator's voice seemed to echo, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. What unfolds next will prove why no one should ever be judged by appearance alone. Richard chuckled bitterly, unwilling to let go of his prejudice. "Colonel?" He gestured at her dismissively. "I respect the military, but I'm not trusting my life to some fantasy. My wife and I paid for first class to avoid nonsense like this." Murmurs rippled through the cabin, doubt and fear feeding each other. An elderly woman whispered, "Is she really qualified? She looks so young." Then the cabin door opened. James Wilson appeared, pale and desperate. His voice wavered. "Please, Captain Mitchell is seizing. I've never flown through conditions like this alone. We need help now." Richard rose again, chest puffed with false authority. I've flown across Europe in luxury jets. I know the procedures. Kesha stood perfectly still, weighing the moment. Years of service had taught her when to fight and when to wait. But when she looked into James's terrified eyes, the decision was made for her. Something deep inside, the same force that had carried her through impossible missions, snapped into action. "Mr. Wilson," she said firmly, "give me our altitude, speed, and weather conditions." James answered automatically, sensing her authority. 38,000 feet, speed 450 knots, crosswinds at 120, gusting up to 160. Richard laughed cruelly. Impressive. She memorized some numbers off the internet. That doesn't make her a pilot. Kesha didn't flinch. Without hesitation, she began reciting complex emergency procedures. Line by line, detail by detail, protocols no civilian would know. Her words filled the cabin for 2 full minutes, each one precise and sharp as steel. When she stopped, silence blanketed the plane, broken only by the roar of the storm outside. James stared at her, relief washing over his features. "Ma'am, the cabin is yours." But Richard still wasn't finished. He scoffed loudly. "Anyone can memorize procedures. Show us proof. Where's your ID?" The words stung like daggers, the same kind of doubt Kesha had battled her whole career. She remembered the whispers, the promotions denied, the times her abilities were dismissed because of her skin color or gender. But she also remembered every victory she'd carved out by sheer skill and determination. Her voice was steady, almost chilling. "Mr. Blackwood, there are 3 types of pilots. Those who fly when it's easy. Those who fly when it's hard. And those who fly when it's impossible." The plane lurched violently, screams rising from the passengers. Kesha didn't move, her balance perfect. "I have saved 17 aircraft in situations the manuals deemed unrecoverable. And what qualifies me now isn't medals or hours logged. It's that I am the only one here who has flown through a war zone, 2 engines out, no navigation, missiles on my tail, and still brought my squadron home." As she stepped into the cockpit, she paused, looking Richard in the eye one last time. "When we land safely, and we will, you'll remember that a black woman you dismissed as unworthy saved your life and your family's too." The cabin fell silent. For the first time in decades, Richard felt the crushing weight of being wrong. Not just wrong, devastatingly wrong. What no one yet knew was that Kesha Washington carried not only the skill to save them, but a history so remarkable it would redefine their understanding of heroism forever. Inside the cockpit, the scene was chaos. Captain Mitchell was strapped into his seat, his body convulsing violently. Foam bubbled at the corner of his mouth, alarms screamed from the control panels, and James Wilson stood frozen, his hands trembling above the controls he could no longer manage. The storm outside slammed against the aircraft like a giant determined to tear it apart. "First aid now," Kesha ordered, her voice sharp and commanding, slicing through the panic. She moved with the confidence of someone who had treated wounded soldiers in combat zones where hesitation meant death. Quickly, she checked Mitchell's vitals, her eyes narrowing as she worked. "We have 15 minutes before full cardiac arrest." James stared at her in disbelief, his fear momentarily eclipsed by awe. "Colonel, how do you know so much about emergency medicine?" 10 years flying rescue missions in hostile territory," she replied, adjusting navigation controls while simultaneously treating the captain. Her hands didn't falter once. "When you're the only thing standing between a wounded soldier and death, you learn fast." Back in the cabin, panic had taken on another form. Richard Blackwood was holding court in first class, muttering bitterly to anyone willing to listen. "Did you see her clothes? Qualified people don't fly economy in jeans. She's no pilot. She doesn't even look like she belongs here." His words dripped with contempt, feeding the fear of those around him. "We're all doomed because they let an imposter into the cockpit." For the first time, his wife Victoria spoke up, her voice sharp with frustration. "Richard, enough. You sound ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" he shot back, his face reddening. "I'm saving our lives. You expect me to trust our safety to someone like her?" His rant was cut off by the sound of Kesha's voice, calm and unwavering, over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Washington speaking. I have assumed command of this aircraft until we reach our destination. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of the crew. We will get through this together." The authority in her tone was undeniable. It wasn't the sound of someone begging for trust, it was the sound of a leader accustomed to being obeyed. Even Richard, despite himself, felt a chill run down his spine. In the cockpit, Kesha was already transforming James from a panicked co-pilot into an efficient partner. "James, focus on monitoring our fuel and pressurization systems. Report to me every 30 seconds. I'll handle the storm." "Yes, ma'am," he answered, his confidence slowly returning as her presence anchored him. Something about her steadiness made it easier to believe survival was possible. Then Kesha did something that left James stunned. She didn't follow standard emergency routes. Instead, she began sketching out a trajectory on a notepad, calculating angles and speeds that defied every protocol. She wasn't trying to go around the storm, she was planning to fly straight through it. "Colonel," James said, his voice shaky, "with all respect, this is against every safety regulation we've got." For the first time since taking control, Kesha allowed herself a small smile. "James, let me tell you something. In 2018, during a rescue mission in Afghanistan, our aircraft was hit by missiles. We lost 2 engines, navigation was gone, and visibility dropped to 0 in a sandstorm. The manual said we should eject. But 17 wounded soldiers were depending on me. I threw the book out the window and trusted my training. And I brought them all home." Her words sank into James like stone. This wasn't bravado, this was experience. He realized then that he wasn't just working with a pilot. He was working with someone extraordinary. "Sometimes, James," she continued, eyes fixed on the instruments, "following the rules kills people. Knowing them well enough to break them at the right time, that's what saves lives." At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Richard had convinced a nervous flight attendant to let him through, insisting he had relevant experience. He barged inside, his voice booming. "This is madness. She's putting us all in danger. I demand to speak with air traffic control right now." Kesha didn't even turn. "Mr. Blackwood, this is not a lounge. Return to your seat. Tourist." Richard's voice cracked with indignation. "I've flown in more private jets than you can imagine. I know aviation. What you're doing is suicide." Before Kesha could respond, another figure appeared behind him. Dr. Patricia Chun, chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm. "Colonel Washington, I'm Dr. Chun. I've treated pilots with neurological injuries in military hospitals. I can help with Captain Mitchell." Kesha turned to her, meeting her eyes with recognition, not as acquaintances, but as professionals who knew what it meant to carry lives on their shoulders. "Doctor, your help would be invaluable. He's stable for now, but he needs close monitoring." Richard scoffed. "This is a conspiracy. You're all going to kill us." Dr. Chun faced him with the cool patience of someone used to dealing with hysterical relatives in emergency rooms. "Mr. Blackwood, I've seen hundreds of military pilots. What this woman has, the training, the calm, money can't buy it. Trust her." "Trust her?" Richard barked, his laugh sharp and bitter. "Based on what?" "Her word." That's when Kesha, still flying with flawless precision, gave a command that changed everything. "James, tune us to emergency military frequency 121.5. Patch me to Andrews Air Force Base." James obeyed, and Kesha spoke into the radio, her voice steady. "Colonel Washington, code name Spectre, requesting identity confirmation. Civilian emergency." The reply came instantly, loud and clear. "Spectre? Is that really you?" It was Commander Rodriguez of Military Air Traffic Control. "We confirm identity. The entire Air Force has been looking for you. We lost your signal 20 minutes ago. Spectre, the nation is mobilized to assist." The cabin fell silent. The weight of that one word, Spectre, hung in the air. Richard turned pale, realizing for the first time just how badly he had misjudged her. This wasn't just a pilot. This was a legend. "Andrews Air Force," Kesha continued smoothly, "we have simultaneous medical and weather emergencies. Captain incapacitated. Requesting coordinates for emergency landing at nearest 747 capable airport. Spectre, you have top priority, the voice replied. All airspace has been cleared. Baltimore International is prepping for emergency landing. Dr. Chun allowed herself a discreet smile, catching Richard's stunned expression. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, how many tourists does the entire U.S. Air Force mobilize for? What none of them realized yet was that the true crisis had only just begun. The storm outside was intensifying beyond anything recorded, and in the next few minutes, Kesha would reveal a level of skill that no manual could ever teach, and no prejudice could ever diminish. Spectre, this is Andrews Base. The military controller's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. The storm is intensifying far beyond predictions. Winds at 180 kilometers per hour, hail the size of baseballs. All airports in the region are shutting down. You are the only aircraft still airborne. The words hit Richard Blackwood like a punch to the gut. They weren't just on a rough flight, they were flying through what sounded like the end of the world. And their only hope was the woman he had mocked, dismissed, and tried to undermine. In the cockpit, Kesha's expression didn't change. She kept her hands steady on the controls, scanning instruments with the focus of someone who had faced storms before and survived. James, she said calmly, I need you monitoring our vertical speed and air pressure. We're about to attempt something no one has ever tried in a Boeing 747. James blinked hard, his throat dry. Colonel, what exactly are we doing? A controlled spiral descent, she replied without hesitation. Straight through the eye of the storm. James froze. The maneuver was something he had only heard about in fighter jet training modules. Never for a commercial airliner of this size. That's impossible. Impossible, Kesha said, her voice steady as steel, is where I live. Her hands moved across the controls like they were extensions of her own body. Every adjustment was precise, purposeful. It was as if she could feel the aircraft breathing with her. Another voice cut into the radio. Spectre, this is General Patricia Hayes from the Pentagon Air Operations Command. We confirm you led Operation Tempest Shield in 2019, saving multiple aircraft in a sandstorm. Is that correct? Confirmed, General, Kesha responded, her tone clipped and professional. Different atmospheric variables, but same principle. James stared at her in awe. You saved other aircraft, over radio guidance alone? 17 of them, Kesha said, eyes fixed forward. When you learn to see atmospheric patterns in 3 dimensions, you can guide anything that flies, even without touching the controls. Richard felt his legs weaken. The reality of who this woman truly was sank in like ice water. This wasn't just a capable pilot. This was someone whose name echoed through military corridors, a woman whose skills were studied by allies and feared by enemies. And he had dared to question her. Colonel, Dr. Chun interjected, her voice calm but firm, the descent you're planning will subject Captain Mitchell to extreme G-forces. I'll monitor him, but I need you to know the risks. Kesha nodded without hesitation. Do what you must, Doctor. Keeping him alive is as critical as landing this plane. She turned back to the radio. General Hayes confirmed that all civilian aircraft have been rerouted. I don't want anyone trying to follow our path. Spectre, the general replied, you are the only flight in U.S. airspace. 13 military bases are tracking you. The president has been personally briefed. Richard's world spun. The president of the United States was being updated on a flight he was sitting on, flown by the very woman he had sneered at minutes earlier. His arrogance crumbled under the weight of humiliation. James, Kesha commanded, her voice sharp, take over comms with air traffic. I need full focus for the descent. Richard finally broke his silence, his voice trembling now. Colonel Washington. I was wrong. I need to apologize. What I said earlier. Kesha cut him off without turning her head. Your apologies can wait, Mr. Blackwood. Right now, lives come first. The plane shuddered violently as she began the maneuver. The nose tilted downward, instruments blaring as altitude dropped rapidly. Passengers screamed, some clutching their seats in terror. But inside the cockpit, Kesha was calm, guiding the aircraft into a spiraling descent that defied the limits of commercial aviation physics. James watched the readings, his eyes wide. 4,000 feet per minute. Colonel, how are you keeping her stable? Applied physics, Kesha replied, her voice even, and 17 years of surviving the impossible. Through the windows, lightning lit up the sky in violent flashes, illuminating walls of cloud that looked like mountains of fire and ash. But within that chaos, Kesha had found a narrow column of descending air, a tunnel of relative stability hidden inside the storm's fury. My God, James whispered. How did you even know this current was here? 10 years flying through man-made hurricanes and combat zones, Kesha answered, her eyes locked on the storm. Sandstorms, explosions, whether no civilian pilot will ever see. When you've faced the impossible enough times, you learn to see patterns others can't. Spectre, Commander Rodriguez's voice broke through the radio, his tone almost reverent. We're tracking your descent on radar. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. How are you keeping that aircraft intact? Kesha's response was calm, matter-of-fact. Experienced, Commander. And a refusal to let 300 people die today. Richard pressed his hand against the window, his breath ragged as he stared into the storm. Lightning arced across the sky, thunder cracked like cannon fire, but somehow, impossibly, the plane moved with grace, steady under Kesha's control. General Hayes, Kesha called over the radio, prepare Dover Air Force Base. We'll need full emergency protocol, runway foam, medical crews, ambulances. Clear the airspace completely. Spectre, the general replied, Dover is ready. Main runway cleared, foam applied, full medical on standby. You have absolute priority. Kesha's lips tightened into the faintest smile. Good. Then watch closely. You're about to see why they call me Spectre. In the cabin, passengers clung to each other, too terrified to speak. But in the cockpit, James, Dr. Chun, and even Richard realized they were in the presence of something beyond extraordinary. Over the next minutes they would witness not just survival but mastery, the kind that rewrote the very meaning of heroism. The descent pressed every passenger into their seats as the 747 spiraled down through the storm. People screamed, some prayed louder, while others sat frozen in silence, unable to process the violence of the skies around them. Lightning flashed so close it seemed to strike the wingtips, illuminating faces pale with terror. The aircraft was dropping thousands of feet every minute, yet under Kesha's command, it felt strangely controlled, as if the storm itself was bowing to her will. Spectre, General Hayes's voice thundered through the radio, filled with urgency. All radar confirms, your maneuver is unprecedented. We have 13 bases tracking every move. The President has cleared every military and civilian channel for your landing. Copy that, General, Kesha replied, her voice steady as stone. Maintain medical standby at Dover Air Force Base. I'll bring this aircraft down intact. James could barely believe what he was watching. Kesha's hands moved over the controls with surgical precision, adjusting throttle, pitch, and rudder as though the massive jet were an extension of her own body. Sweat glistened on his forehead, but his admiration only grew. Colonel, this isn't flying. This is rewriting aviation physics. Kesha didn't flinch. Flying is simple, James. It's people who make it complicated. Behind them, Richard still hovered near the cockpit door, his earlier arrogance replaced with trembling shame. He had mocked her, belittled her, declared her unfit, yet now his very survival depended on the woman he dismissed as ordinary. His voice cracked as he whispered almost to himself, She's not even human. She's something else. Dr. Chun glanced at him, unimpressed. She's human. Just exceptional. And right now, she's the only reason you're alive. The captain's body jerked again, monitors screaming. Dr. Chun moved fast, adjusting his oxygen and keeping a hand on his pulse. Colonel, his condition is holding, but if this descent pushes him any harder, we may lose him. Do what you need, Doctor, Kesha answered without looking back. I'll handle the storm. You handle him. Outside, the plane broke into the storm's eye, a temporary calm that revealed towering walls of cloud around them, glowing with lightning in every direction. For a brief moment, the cabin was silent. Passengers opened their eyes, unsure if the nightmare was over or just beginning. James glanced at the instruments, then at Kesha. "Colonel, we're through the eye. But turbulence will slam us again in less than 2 minutes. How do we ride this out?" Kesha's eyes narrowed. "We don't ride it out. We cut straight through." Before James could argue, another voice broke into the radio. "Spectre, this is Commander Rodriguez. Radar confirms your trajectory. What you're doing is impossible. How are you keeping that aircraft aligned?" "By refusing to let fear drive the controls," Kesha said. Her tone was calm, yet carried the weight of a lifetime of defying expectations. "You want to survive storms like this? You don't negotiate with them. You take command." Richard's knees buckled as he stumbled back into first class, shaken and pale. For the first time in decades, the man who measured his worth in wealth and status felt the crushing weight of insignificance. Around him, passengers whispered in disbelief. She's actually doing it. That woman is saving us. I didn't think someone like her could." The last comment hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Richard buried his face in his hands, realizing just how deep his prejudice had blinded him. The very person he dismissed as unworthy was performing a miracle at 30,000 feet. Back in the cockpit, the storm closed in again. The aircraft rattled violently, alarms blaring, turbulence throwing the massive jet like a toy. James gripped his harness with white knuckles. "Colonel, this isn't survivable. We can't push a 747 through this kind of current." Kesha's voice cut him off. "James, look at me." He turned, his chest heaving with fear. "I've flown with 2 engines out, no navigation and missiles chasing me. I've seen storms man-made and natural that should have ended me. But I don't lose planes. Not then. Not now. Not ever." Her words weren't shouted, they were spoken with such calm certainty that James felt his fear break, replaced by something else. "Faith." The radio crackled again. "Spectre, this is General Hayes. Dover runway is prepped. We have ambulances, emergency teams, and medical staff waiting. The entire East Coast is watching. You are priority 1. Kesha adjusted the yoke, preparing for the final descent. "Copy that, General. Then watch carefully. Because this won't just be a landing, it'll be a lesson." Passengers gripped their seats as the plane tilted again, plunging toward the storm's lower levels. Families held hands, strangers clung to each other, and prayers rose louder than the thunder outside. But in the cockpit, one woman's unshakable hands and unbreakable will guided them closer to survival. Richard closed his eyes, ashamed of everything he had said, every assumption he had made. In that moment he knew that when they landed, if they landed, he would never be the same man again. And for Kesha, this was more than just another mission. This was the moment her entire life had prepared her for, the moment that would prove to everyone watching that real power doesn't come from privilege, but from courage, skill, and the will to endure the impossible. The final descent had begun. The Boeing 747 roared as it cut through the storm's lower layers, the engine straining against winds strong enough to rip smaller aircraft apart. Rain hammered the fuselage like bullets, and sheets of lightning danced across the sky, turning the cabin into a theater of flashing white and blue. Every passenger could feel it, the fight between survival and disaster balanced on a razor's edge. In the cockpit, Kesha's focus was absolute. Her hands never wavered, guiding the aircraft with a confidence that seemed almost supernatural. James read off the numbers, his voice now steady as if Kesha's calm had infected him. Altitude 20,000 feet. Descent rate stable. Pressure holding. "Good," Kesha replied, her eyes locked on the instruments. "Keep that information coming every 30 seconds. We're threading a needle and precision is survival." Dr. Chun wiped sweat from her forehead as she leaned over Captain Mitchell, who remained unconscious, his breathing ragged. "Colonel, his vitals are weak but steady. Whatever landing you're planning, make it smooth. If the G-forces spike again, I can't promise he'll survive." "Understood, Doctor," Kesha said. "Do your job. I'll do mine." In the cabin, the atmosphere shifted from panic to stunned silence. Passengers clung to every word that filtered through the intercom, realizing they were witnessing something beyond ordinary. A few whispered prayers turned into cries of hope, their voices rising above the storm. "She's going to get us through. That woman's saving our lives." Richard Blackwood sat hunched in his seat, staring at the floor. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced with the crushing weight of regret. The cruel comments, the dismissive sneers, the way he had insisted he knew better, all of it now felt like poison in his veins. His wife Victoria looked at him with quiet disgust. "You doubted her because of what she looked like," she whispered sharply. "Now she's saving our children." Richard swallowed hard, his voice low, almost broken. "I was wrong." At that moment the radio crackled again. "Spectre, this is Dover. Runway cleared, foam applied. Emergency crews ready. You have full priority." "Copy, Dover," Kesha answered. Her voice carried no fear, no hesitation. "I'm bringing her in." James glanced at her, unable to hide his awe. "Colonel, I've never seen anyone fly like this. How do you stay so calm?" Kesha's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Calm isn't the absence of fear, James. It's mastering it. In war, fear kills faster than bullets. Out here, fear kills faster than storms." The aircraft dropped again, rattling as it broke through another turbulent layer. The cabin erupted in screams, overhead bins burst open and oxygen masks swung wildly. But Kesha's grip didn't falter. She leaned into the turbulence, her movements fluid, almost instinctual. "Spectre," General Hayes's voice broke in again. "You are cleared for final approach. The President himself is monitoring your landing." Kesha exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing as the runway lights of Dover finally flickered in the distance, a glowing strip of salvation cutting through the rain. "James, deploy landing gear. Maintain flap settings on my command." "Yes, ma'am," James replied instantly, his hands moving with purpose. Richard pressed his face to the window, staring at the glowing runway ahead. For the first time in his life he felt something unfamiliar: humility. The realization that money, status, and pride meant nothing at 30,000 feet in a storm. The only thing that mattered now was the black woman he had mocked, the woman holding all of their lives in her steady hands. As the wheels lowered, the storm howled louder, almost as if it were determined to claim them before they touched ground. But Kesha remained unshaken. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "James, final flaps. Stabilize approach speed. Hold steady." The aircraft jolted violently as a crosswind slammed against it. Gasps filled the cabin. The massive jet tilted dangerously, but Kesha's correction was instant. She steadied the plane, nudging it back into alignment with skill so precise it seemed choreographed. "Spectre," Rodriguez's voice broke in, awe evident even over the static. "You're lined up perfectly. I don't know how you're doing this, but Godspeed." "Not God," Kesha replied quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Just training. And refusal to fail." The runway drew closer. Lights blurred through sheets of rain as the aircraft dropped lower, the engines howling against the drag. Passengers braced for impact, many crying openly, some whispering words of love to anyone who would listen. Kesha's hands were steady as ever, her eyes locked on the strip of salvation ahead. "Hold on," she murmured, more to the passengers than to herself. "This is the moment." At that instant, Richard gripped Victoria's hand, tears streaking his face. For the first time he realized the bitter truth, that survival had nothing to do with wealth or privilege. It came down to courage, competence, and the steady hands of the very woman he had despised. The wheels screeched as they kissed the runway. The plane shuddered violently, spray exploding from beneath it, tires straining against the wet asphalt. Kesha guided the aircraft with iron control, easing it down the runway as ambulances and emergency trucks raced alongside. And then silence. The storm still raged outside, but inside the plane slowed to a roll, then a crawl. They were on the ground. Safe. For a moment no one spoke. Then cheers erupted through the cabin. Strangers hugged, children laughed through tears, and grown men sobbed openly. Every passenger knew they had witnessed a miracle, not from luck, but from the steady hands and unshakable will of a woman they had underestimated. Kesha exhaled slowly, leaning back in her seat. Her voice finally came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dover Air Force Base. We've landed safely. Please remain seated as emergency crews board." The plane shook with applause, the sound of 300 lives acknowledging the miracle of their survival. And in that moment, Richard Blackwood, once so certain of his superiority, bowed his head in silence. For the first time in his life he understood what true greatness looked like, and it had nothing to do with him. 6 months later, the memory of that storm still echoed across the country. The footage of the miraculous landing had gone viral, broadcast on every network, analyzed by every aviation expert. Newspapers called it, "the day courage rewrote the sky." To the passengers, it was simply the day Colonel Kesha Washington saved their lives. At the Pentagon, a ceremony was held in her honor. In front of generals, lawmakers, and a sea of uniformed cadets, Kesha stood tall in her dress blues. The Secretary of Defense pinned a new star on her shoulder, announcing her promotion to Brigadier General, the youngest black woman in U.S. history to achieve that rank. General Washington didn't just save 312 lives, he declared. She redefined what it means to lead under fire. Her storm navigation technique is now taught worldwide. And her example proves once and for all that true competence has no appearance, no color, only character. Applause thundered across the hall as cameras flashed, capturing the face of a woman who had risen above doubt, prejudice, and impossible odds. Beside the stage, Dr. Patricia Chun clapped proudly, knowing she had witnessed greatness firsthand. James Wilson, now a captain himself, stood at attention, inspired by the woman who had shown him what real leadership looked like. But not everyone's story ended in triumph. Richard Blackwood's life unraveled in the months after the flight. His dismissive words, recorded on passenger phones, spread across social media, viewed by millions. The clip of him mocking Kesha's qualifications while she prepared to save his life became a symbol of arrogance and prejudice. His clients abandoned his investment firm, costing him nearly everything. Within 3 months he filed for bankruptcy. At home the damage was worse. His 12-year-old daughter once asked innocently, "Daddy, why do people get so angry when they hear your name?" The question pierced deeper than any insult. His wife, Victoria, filed for divorce, citing years of arrogance and the humiliation of seeing his ignorance exposed to the world. She left with half his assets and full custody of their children. The man who once flaunted wealth and status was reduced to selling cars at a used dealership, taking the bus to work, the very ordinary life he once mocked. Every day as he rode through the city, Richard passed a giant billboard, Kesha Washington in uniform, the words bold above her head, "Leadership has no color. It has character." One day years later, Richard spotted her at an airport. She was in full uniform, a general now, surrounded by aides and security. He, in his cheap dealership polo, carried a scuffed suitcase. Their eyes met. For a moment, he saw not the woman he once ridiculed, but the living embodiment of everything he had lost, and everything she had become. He approached quietly. "General Washington," he said, his voice low, humbled. "I want to apologize for everything I said on that flight." Kesha studied him, seeing not the arrogant man from before but a broken shell, stripped of illusions. Her reply was calm, steady. "Mr. Blackwood, you gave me the greatest gift possible that day." Richard blinked. "A gift? How?" "You reminded me why I do what I do. Every mission, every life I save, every pilot I train, it's all fueled by people like you. The ones who doubt me. The ones who underestimate me. You make me sharper, stronger, more determined to prove that prejudice can never define ability." Richard's throat tightened. "I lost everything because of my arrogance." Kesha shook her head. "No, you never had anything real to lose. Privilege is not achievement. Respect is not inherited. Competence is not appearance. The only thing that lasts is character. And that's something no amount of money can buy." She turned, walking away with her team, leaving Richard standing small and silent in her shadow. For the first time in his life, he understood what true greatness looked like, Not in wealth or seats of power, but in resilience, skill, and the courage to rise when others fall. Kesha's revenge was never in humiliating him. Her revenge was in building a legacy so undeniable that his ignorance became irrelevant. Success had spoken louder than his prejudice ever could. In her final public interview, she summed up her journey with words that would inspire generations. While they waste their time underestimating us, we spend our time becoming unforgettable. Her story became a beacon, proof that greatness doesn't ask for permission, it simply shines. So now, let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated only to prove someone devastatingly wrong? Share your story of resilience in the comments. And if you believe in courage, justice, and the power of rising above, subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us all. True character will always outshine prejudice.